Part 10. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 91. Tap, tap, tap. The horse's hooves trampled the official road in the bamboo forest. There were no lights around, and because of the heavy snow, it was almost pitch dark. There were more than 100,000 people buried in the tomb of heroes and martyrs. Naturally, the common people felt that the yin energy was too heavy, and there was nothing worth stealing inside. Therefore, except for the officials watching over the ancestral hall, there was no ghost in other places. Because he was out at night to do business, there were torches, hose, and other objects hanging on the side of the horse. Su Buling lit a torch and trotted on the stone road between the bamboo forest. It took about half an hour to get here. The little arm around his waist was always tightly tied, and his back was extremely warm, as if leaning on soft cotton. Su Buling thought Xiao Manzi was shy and didn't dare to speak. When he was about to reach the place, he was ready to open his mouth to remind her, but he heard a hoo-hoo sound from behind. Well, he fell asleep, and his heart was bigger than him. Su Buling raised his eyebrows. He felt that the current situation was like a cold female hero leading a gang of hooligans. It was hard to say who was taking advantage of whom. The horse trotted around a large ancestral hall outside the tomb of heroes and martyrs, and soon came to a cemetery in the corner of the bamboo sea. The cemetery was like an ordinary cemetery, with tombs neatly arranged in it. There were tombstones and stone incense tables for sacrifice in front. The last one was Lu Hoer's tomb, and there were sacrificial supplies in front. The paper money scattered on the ground was mostly covered by the snow. Manzi, don't sleep. Oh. Zhu Manzi woke up in a daze. When he found that he had fallen asleep, he suddenly woke up, his face flushed, and jumped off the horse. Su Buling turned over and got off the horse, and took the hoe from the side of the horse. Zhu Manzi took out the incense money from the cloth bag of Ma Ce, and first ran to Lu Hoer's tomb to pay homage. Su Buling picked up a hoe and searched in the cemetery. There were thousands of wolf guards who died in the line of duty buried here. They were arranged according to the time of their death, so it was not difficult to find them. He searched according to the year of death on the tombstone and soon found the grave of Lin Yang in Tianqiaoying. Because he died 10 years ago, the graves here were old. Lin Yang's grave was full of dead grass and broken branches, and the tombstone was also stained with mud and water. It seemed that no one had worshipped for a long time. Su Buling was not afraid of ghosts and gods, but he still had the minimum respect for the dead. After Zhu Manzi finished worshipping Lu Hoer, he took 3 incense sticks from her hand, lit them, and inserted them in front of the grave. He also burned some paper money before coming to the grave. The snow was heavy and the wind was gusty. Zhu Manzi was actually a little scared, and digging up people's graves has always been a bad thing. She stood beside the grave holding a torch and hesitated. "Mr. Su, will the senior wolf guard come to settle accounts with you tonight?" Su Buling paused with the hoe he raised, turned his head and said, "Did you forget my nickname?" Zhu Manzi blinked, "Eagle Finger Wanderer. It's the little king of hell." Su Buling glanced at her with some amusement, and began to dig the soil and grave. Zhu Manzi always felt very cautious, afraid that something would come out. He only dared to look at Su Buling and said something to make conversation. "I heard from the storyteller that when Mr. Su was 16 years old, he ran to the territory of northern Qi alone and killed more than 100 people. Is it true?" Su Buling thought about it for a while and nodded. "I wanted to go to the capital of northern Qi to have a look, but unfortunately there was a desert outside the pass, and bandits were rampant. I got lost after chasing for a few days and went back." "Is Ziliang beautiful?" "Well, it's close to the western regions and the grasslands. It's not as prosperous as Chang'an, and it's definitely not as beautiful as Jiangnan." Zhu Manzi listened quietly, thought about it, and asked again, there are rumors in the market that there are vassal kings who want to rebel and the court wants to reduce the vassal kings. Is it true? This question was too rash, and he didn't know how to be evasive at all. However, Su Buling didn't care about it. He thought about it carefully, shook his head and chuckled. I don't know either. Dayo has more than one vassal king. When the previous emperor was in power, my father and I went to Beijing to study. The current emperor was just coming of age. We were both studying in the Wenq garden of the Imperial College at that time. We had a very good relationship and even burned yellow paper and cut off a chicken head to swear brotherhood. Zhu Manzi blinked his eyes. I heard that. Prince Su was very, very unconventional in the capital back then. Su Buling waved his hoe and chuckled twice. Not only unconventional, but there were 4 pests in the capital in Chang'an back then. Guess which 4 pests they were? Zhu Manzi hooked the hair by her ear and shook her head embarrassedly. I don't know. The first 3 of the 4 pests in the capital are the girls in Yingchun Tower, the gambling dens in Longjian Pavilion, and the quacks in Hutai Street. If you touch any of them, you will be in trouble. The 4th pest is my father. He was so famous in the capital back then, and he caused trouble everywhere. It was a mess, and whoever got involved would be in trouble. What happened next? Then, my father returned to his fiefdom safely and inherited the throne. He was much better than me. Su Buling shook his head with some self-abasement, and continued, I haven't heard the elders talk about what happened later. Your Majesty inherited the throne, and my father inherited the throne. They never drank together again, until 10 years ago, the Donghai Lu family refused to obey the court's control. In order to shock the world's heroes, the Majesty ordered Prince Su to lead troops to pacify the Donghai Lu family. Zhu Manzi nodded, I know this. The Iron Eagle hunting deer involved many people in the martial arts world. The Donghai Lu family is the family of Su Shize's grandfather, right? Yes. Su Buling's voice was flat. My father took the order to lead troops to attack the Donghai Lu family. Although the blood flowed like a river, he finally spared his hands and did not massacre the family. However, the Donghai Lu family, which had been passed down for thousands of years, still fell into a slump, and my mother also. After all, it was fused with memories. When Su Buling said this, his heart felt sour and he couldn't go on, leaving only a soft sigh. In the memory, Princess Su was really good to Su Buling, so good that Su Buling didn't dare to recall her childhood days. Zhu Manzi pursed his lips, feeling a little sad, and thought for a while. Then, wasn't the princess killed by the Holy One? Su Buling shook his head and continued to dig the grave. It is difficult to settle this account clearly. The Lu family of Donghai disobeyed orders first, and the imperial court was not peaceful and it was difficult to bring peace to the world. My father, the king, accepted the imperial edict himself. Because he did not accept it, he went to the one who put down the rebellion was the nearest king of Qi. Then, although my father led troops to the Lu family in the East China Sea, he secretly protected the Lu family in the end and only killed the head of the Lu family to report to the court, that is, my grandfather. If the king asks his minister to die, he must die. Strictly speaking, my father disobeyed the emperor's order. Zhu Manzi frowned tightly, and after calculating for a long time, he whispered, this account is really not easy to settle. The court has a personal vendetta, and what Su Wang is resisting is the emperor's order. No wonder some vassal kings want to. There are rumors of rebellion and the imperial court wants to cut down the vassalage. If you are from Jianghu, I think King Su is doing the right thing and attaches great importance to friendship. The temple is not the martial arts world, and it doesn't care about friendship. Su Buling sighed, so, no one knows whether the rumors of the feudal king wants to rebel or the imperial court wants to cut down the feudal clan are true or false. After all, they all have motives. It's hard not to doubt. While he was talking, there was a muffled sound of wood coming from under the hoe. Boom. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 92. Su Buling felt that he had dug the coffin, so he stopped and used a hoe to turn over all the soil, revealing the coffin underneath, which was painted black. Zhu Manzi took the crowbar from the side of the horse, and Su Buling stood next to the coffin and used the crowbar to force open the coffin. Click. As soon as a gap was opened, black mist floated out of the coffin. Su Buling was caught off guard and his face changed suddenly. He held his breath and stood up suddenly, landing outside the grave. He picked up Zhu Manzi and ran outside. He jumped 10 feet away and did not stop until he was dozens of feet away. Zhu Manzi thought he had seen a ghost, and threw away the torch. He hugged Su Buling's neck, screamed Baya and buried his little face in Su Buling's arms. It's indeed dragon locking goo. Su Buling hugged Zhu Manzi with one hand and raised his hand to caress her back twice, as if he were holding a daughter. The black mist coming out of the coffin made Su Buling feel familiar. Last year in the Weha area, he had a high fever and was bedridden in the carriage. When more than 100 assassins came to kill him, he happened to come over. Han Yun used his instincts to fight with a sword. The thieves smashed a bottle at his feet, and it contained this kind of black fog. Thinking of the severe pain that eroded his limbs and bones, Su Buling still feels chills in his heart when he recalls it. If it weren't for his inhumanly strong physique and tenacious desire to survive, he might have committed suicide at that time. The person in the coffin has been dead for 10 years, but the poison is still there, which shows how domineering this dragon-locking poison is. While Su Buling was thinking, he suddenly heard a whisper. Buddha and Taoist ancestors bless you. This little girl has no intention of offending ghosts and gods. If you want to find it, just look for Prince Su. He dug the grave. Su Buling came to his senses immediately and turned his head to look. Zhu Manzi sat on his arm with his face buried in his arms, shirking responsibility incoherently. Su Buling's face was full of black lines and he patted her buttocks. Zhu de sword god, are you just a guard like this? Zhu Manzi trembled all over, shut up quickly, carefully opened his eyes and took a look, and only after confirming that there was nothing about Friday, did he realize that he jumped out of Su Buling's arms with a sound of ah dash. He lowered his head and smiled. Su Buling shook his head. He didn't share her knowledge. He took the wine gourd from his waist and took a sip. He also tore a piece of cloth from his clothes, soaked it with strong wine, and covered his face. Zhu Manzi's black scarf also follows the same pattern. After waiting outside for half a quarter of an hour, until the black fog in the coffin dissipated, the two of them walked forward cautiously. Su Buling jumped into the pit and opened the coffin completely, revealing the body inside under the light of the fire. The corpse had already become a skeleton, but it was not white bones. It was black from head to toe, and most of it was broken. Su Buling held a piece of leg bone with his handkerchief and picked it up for inspection. He just pinched it with his hands and it broke into pieces. It was extremely fragile. Zhu Manzi looked at it in fear and whispered, "Is this caused by the locking dragon goo?" Su Buling took a look at the marks on the bones. The poison eroded the limbs and bones, and the bones were all broken. It must be dragon locking goo. Su Buling jumped into the pit, placed his leg bone on the snow, then cut his finger with a knife and dripped on the leg bone. A drop of blood quickly turned into black color, but there was no reaction. Su Bulenling frowned, surprise first flashed in his eyes, and then a bit of depression. Zhu Manzi stayed far away and asked in confusion, "What is this?" Su Buling was silent for a moment and then said, "The so-called goo mostly involves sealing hundreds of insects in a vessel so that they can fight and eat each other. After a few years, the ones who are still alive are the goo. Locking dragon goo, the secret method of making it has long been lost, but it is called goo, and the method should be similar. If the poison produced by two goos is stronger, the stronger one will suppress the weaker one, and it is impossible to coexist." Zhu Manzi seemed to understand. "What about now?" The dragon-locking goo on my body and the dragon-locking goo on this corpse were produced by the same goo. After Su Buling finished speaking calmly, he put the leg bones into the coffin, closed the coffin lid with earth, and said no more words. When Zhu Manzi saw Su Buling's stern and fierce look, he didn't dare to speak. In the middle of the night, a torch flickered on the snowy field. Su Buletinling rode back on his horse, his expression not very good, and he looked at Chang'an City where the sea of lights was like a tide from time to time. Zhu Manzi sat obediently behind her, and the horse walked very slowly. She no longer shamelessly hugged Su Buling's waist, but just grabbed Su Buling's skirt with her hands. After thinking for a long time, she smiled. "Mr. Su, don't worry. There will be a way to reach the mountain. At least now we have determined who poisoned you. If you know who poisoned you, you will know who to go to for the antidote. Mr. Su is so skilled in martial arts and so smart. There must be a way." Su Buling came back to his senses, suppressed his complicated emotions for the time being, and smiled lightly. "When this matter is finished, I will take you back to Ziliang and arrange a position for you as the chief retainer of the palace. We can spend as much time as we want." Zhu Manzi was stunned for a moment, blinked his big eyes, and his face turned red unconsciously. His boots dangled on the side of the horse, and he twirled his fingers and thought for a while. "Mr. Su, I have often heard that Shu Lang tells stories about heroes. Anyone who says wait until this matter is finished seems to have a bad ending." Su Buring was speechless for a moment. The atmosphere he had managed to create was gone. He spread his hands and said helplessly, "Whether she is unhappy or not, she will definitely be happy if I ask Ning Qingyi to go to Ziliang as a guest." Zhu Manzi suddenly became anxious, raised his little face and said nervously, "I'm happy to. Anyway, my parents have run away from home. I can go wherever I want, however, I still want to find my parents. Okay, I'll wander around the world with you when the time comes." Zhu Manzi leaned forward a little, curious. "My mother likes flowers, and so do I. Is Prince Su's mansion beautiful?" Su Buring nodded. "Prince Su's mansion is very big. When I was a child, I lived alone outside the city. There was a big sea of flowers outside. Every spring, the sea of flowers stretched as far as the eye could see. There was a small room in the middle, and there was a very big bed inside. The bed can sleep 10 people without being crowded." Zhu Manzi blinked his big eyes and looked a little puzzled. "Why do you want such a big bed? How troublesome is it to get up?" Su Buletinling laughed twice and said seriously, "I was naughty when I was a child. I would jump around when I was sleeping, and accidentally rolled under the bed. The palace had no choice, so they made a very big bed with swings, wooden horses, etc. It was really fun. Wow, I really want to see it. Such a big bed, it must be very comfortable to roll around on. Just rolling around. What if?" The cold wind was blowing, and in the vast sky and earth outside Qujiang Pond, 2 people and 1 horse were walking away. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 93. The next day. After Su Buling rang the 108 morning bells, he straightened his clothes and dressed up. He wore a snow-colored gold-edged robe, cloud-stepping boots with dark hook patterns, a white jade belt hanging from his waist, and long hair tied up like a waterfall. Hosta, coupled with a pair of naturally attractive peach blossom eyes, stunned the palace maid Chiao Yi when she went out, and she was distracted as she walked around. In the past, Su Buring didn't like dressing up very much. He wore plain white robes all year round, so he would only be more grand when going out with Mrs. Liu. Today, in order to inquire about Jia Yi, I had to go into the palace to apologize to the Queen Mother. This was bound to be a tough battle full of dangers. In order to have a better chance of winning, Su Buling had to be more solemn. 4 big horses pulled the luxurious carriage through the bustling Zuk street. Ancient ritual: the emperor drives 6, the princes drive 5, the ministers drive 4, the officials 3, the scholars 2, and the common people 1. 4-horse carriages are also rare in Chang'an. This is the carriage of the Queen Mother's brother Xiao Chuang. This shows how persistent the Queen Mother is in ordering permission to enter the palace. If she doesn't agree, the emperor's chariot will come to the door. Su Buling was sitting upright in the carriage with a stern face. There was a box next to his hand, which contained the rouge and gouache from Xian Zizai. Although it was the leftovers after Mrs. Lu picked it out, it was still valuable. Across the carriage, Qiao Yi, who was dressed in palace attire and looked a little embarrassed, stood up from time to pour tea. Her eyes always glanced at Su Buling, but she didn't dare to look directly at her due to etiquette. Su Buling actually felt very guilty. After thinking about it, he spoke softly. Qiao Yi, can the Queen Mother talk about me these days? Qiao Yi's expression froze slightly, and she blinked, with words written all over her face. Are you still embarrassed to say that? The Queen Mother talks about you in her dreams. Well, the Queen Mother has often mentioned the Crown Prince recently and has been waiting for the Crown Prince to pass. Last time it was an accident. The origin of those poems is hard to explain. It was not my intention to expire, Queen Mother. Qiao Yi bowed slightly and said with a smile, this prince should personally explain to the Queen Mother. I am afraid of being kicked out of the palace, so I really can't speak. Su Buling understood immediately and nodded, feeling that this carriage was not going to the palace, but to the examination room. The wheels rolled over the long white stone street and gradually arrived outside the imperial city. The palace maid opened the carved wooden door of the carriage from the outside. Su Buling leaned slightly and walked out. He was about to get out of the car when he suddenly heard the sound of a silver bell. Turning around, he saw a group of people walking out of Honglu Temple, wearing clothes similar to Miao clothes, joking politely with the court officials. Su Buling only knew how to practice martial arts when he was young, and he didn't move around often after coming to Chang'an. In fact, he didn't know much. After looking at it for a few times, he asked, are these barbarians from South Vietnam? Because Bai was beaten into Nanya by Su Lai, Su Buling said that the barbarians were actually promoted. In the mouth of the Ziliang cavalry, Nanya and Northern Qi have always been losers. Qiao Yi came out, raised her hand to help Su Buling get out of the carriage, and said softly, the envoy from South Vietnam has not been in Beijing recently. He should be an envoy from a small country in the south. Our court has always taken good care of small foreign countries. We have sent back some small things that are not worth mentioning, but we can also send back valuable treasures from mountains and seas. Every year before and after the pass, many people come to Beijing to ask for rewards. Su Buling took a few glances and found that they were basically trash fish. As the eldest son of the vassal prince, he couldn't go to meet the foreign envoys, so he didn't take it to heart at the moment and took a chariot into the imperial city. The Empress Dowager's bedroom behind Changle Palace has changed over the past few days. There is a large tripod in the garden. I don't know where it was dug out. It is probably a cultural relic from the previous dynasty. It is 2 people high and there are piles of it underneath. Firewood. A group of maids guarded outside the palace cautiously. The side hall was filled with poems, calligraphy, and paintings collected from the capital, as well as ingenious objects from all over the world. Several personal female officials took turns to go in to please the Queen Mother. It's a pity that the Queen Mother, who used to be easy to coax, was not just bored this time. She was really angry. She didn't even eat and wanted to leave the palace and go to Prince Su's mansion all day long. As the Queen Mother and the Emperor's direct mother, she always called Songji to Changle Palace to see the Emperor. When King Su arrived in the capital, he had to come to Changal Palace to pay his respects, so there was no reason to go and visit the younger generation in person. Many palace maids did not dare to let the Queen Mother leave the palace for such a trivial matter. They tried to persuade her, but they were running out of ideas. Fortunately, Prince Su is sensible and finally came over today, so the Queen Mother is quieter. At this time, in the main hall of the palace, the Queen Mother in a bright red dress was leaning on the soft couch. Her posture was slightly lazy, her gourd-like figure was graceful, she was holding a teacup in her hand, took a few sips, and looked outside. When I see people coming, I feel a little annoyed. When the maid next to her saw this, she knew that the Queen Mother was going to be sulky. She quickly stepped forward to hold the Queen Mother's hand and said humbly, "Queen Mother, Prince Su will be here soon. Please wait a moment and I'll have someone rush him." The Queen Mother had an alluring appearance, but her face was not very good looking. She was a little tired from lying down, so she changed her position and leaned on the soft couch. The palace maid quickly sat sideways on the carpet and rubbed her legs gently, fearing that the Queen Mother would become ill from suppressing the pain. "Queen Mother, Prince Su has arrived." Fortunately, a soft cry finally sounded from the veranda outside. The Queen Mother opened her eyes, sat up and went to get the bronze mirror placed next to her. But as soon as she stretched out her hand, she paused. She was silent for a while, then lay back down again, holding the teacup gently like a charming lady. Fiddled with. The palace maid was preparing to help the Queen Mother arrange her clothes, and she was slightly puzzled when she saw this. "Queen Mother, why don't you go out to greet her?" The Queen Mother didn't even raise her eyebrows, and said calmly, "How can I, a junior, welcome him in person? Let him come in by himself." The maid nodded and glanced at the Empress Dowager. Because she had been tossing and turning on the couch, her palace skirt was inevitably a little wrinkled and messy, which made her look less dignified. So she bravely raised her hand to help tidy it up. Su Buling got off the sedan chair outside the bedroom, tidied his clothes, and slowly walked through the corridor to the outside of the main hall. It was quiet, and no one even greeted him along the way. The atmosphere was really a bit weird, which was a world of difference from the last time when everyone was treating her like a star. Su Buling was not surprised at all. He walked into the main hall slowly. When he looked up, he saw a beautiful woman in palace clothes lying on the couch. Her skirt was scattered like a peacock, and she was dressed in plain clothes and lightly painted. She was holding a teacup and looked indescribably cool. "Meet the Empress Dowager." Su Buling performed a junior salute, placed the gift box in his hand on the table, and then sat upright beside him with a warm smile on his face. The Queen Mother put on a posture of calling for an accusation, and casually raised her eyes, and saw a handsome young man as white as jade, with sword-like eyebrows and eyes like stars, looking at her with intimacy. The Queen Mother was slightly stunned. It was the first time she saw Su Buling dressed so handsomely, and she almost didn't recognize him. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 94. Thank you to the boss. Sunfish. For the reward. I currently owe money, 10/80ths, it seems like I owe a lot. Facing the handsome young man in front of her, the Queen Mother sat up involuntarily, put down her teacup, and adjusted her dress a little. "No, you're here? I was distracted just now and forgot to pick you up." Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that it would be much easier to deal with than Aunt Lu. His expression was elegant and easygoing, and he said guiltily, "This junior is already ashamed, how can I dare to let the Queen Mother personally greet him, alas." Su Buletinling hesitated to speak and looked sad, which was quite like Mrs. Lu's demeanor. The Queen Mother looked at it for a few times, then frowned slightly, and asked the palace maid to pour a cup of tea, with a soft voice. "Why are you looking so sad? Could it be that something happened?" Su Buling shook his head and was silent for a moment, then said helplessly, "A few days ago in Chengqing Hall, I became famous inexplicably. The courtiers all thought that I wrote those poems. How could I have that ability? 2 poems were written by my grandfather and father, and the last 2 poems were ghostwritten by retainers and Aunt Lu, in order to earn a good reputation for me. Alas, it is shameful to steal poems. I have been tossing and turning these days, but I still can't sleep. It's hard to explain, it's really frustrating." The Queen Mother narrowed her eyes slightly, picked up the teacup, and lay on her side again on the couch. "Do you think I'm stupid?" Su Buletinling's expression froze, then he shook his head. "The Queen Mother's words are serious, I never meant this." The Queen Mother's face turned cold, she looked at the teacup and snorted, "You just deceived those courtiers who were too shy to speak out, and you also want to deceive me too? When Suyu was in the capital, it wasn't like I didn't. I heard Xiao Xiang say that if he could write poetry, I might go to Ziliang and become a princess. What kind of palace would he enter?" Su Buletinling naturally didn't dare to accept this. No one in the world dared to accept it. The Queen Mother held back what she was saying for several days, and she couldn't hold it back as soon as she started. "Old General Su, I didn't mention it in this palace, so I just talked about Lu Hongluan. She is a perfect match for marrying into my Xiao family, but she has never been good at poetry and songs. Back then, she said Suyu is in the capital, and Hongluan is following your mother around all day long, making your father so angry that he can't even eat." Su Buling shook his head and chuckled, "When my father was studying in the capital, Aunt Lu was only 10 years old, so it's natural that she would be a bit playful." The Queen Mother raised her eyelashes slightly, "She has not grown up yet. She is not polite to anyone except you all day long. She is still unbearable and full of sorrow. She almost said in front of me, 'My nephew is better than you, it's much more powerful. Are you angry? Are you angry?'" Su Buling's face was covered with black lines, he touched his nose, but he really had nothing to say. The Queen Mother spoke for a moment, and the dissatisfaction in her heart finally subsided a little. She raised her slender fingers and pointed outward. "A gentleman's words are hard to follow, and as a prince, you should follow his words. Today, either you go out and stew yourself, or you write a few poems for me, otherwise, I will give it to Prince Su. Send a letter, and I will take you back to Huainan." "Ah!" Su Buletinling was shocked and looked at the Queen Mother in disbelief. The Queen Mother raised her eyebrows, "Don't believe it? If I don't even have this power, there is no need for me to be the Queen Mother. Moreover, Hongluan is the daughter-in-law of my Xiao family. It is just and legitimate for me to let her return to the Xiao family in Huainan. The most poisonous woman's heart is that the ancients are honest and don't deceive me." Su Buling never expected that the Queen Mother could threaten him by depriving him of his custody rights. Without Aunt Lu, how would he be able to live in the capital? Your Majesty, think about it again. Aunt Lu loves me so much that it's really inappropriate for us to be so far away from each other." The Queen Mother twirled the teacup and said casually, "Whether it suits you or not is not up to you." Su Buling was speechless for a moment. He used to say this to others, but when it was his turn, he really didn't feel good. Well, articles are made by nature, and a good hand comes by chance. The younger generation is not very talented in learning, so writing poems is really difficult. The Queen Mother curled her lips and took a sip from the teacup. "I am not in a hurry. I have been in Changle Palace for 10 years, so I have plenty of time. If you can't write a poem today, you can think about it slowly. If you really can't think of it, just say it, and I will teach you how to write it in the future." Su Buletinling looked helpless. Now when he inquired about the news, the Queen Mother would definitely say, "I'll tell you as soon as I write a poem." He still had to appease the Queen Mother first. Su Buling thought for a moment and reluctantly nodded. "Well, let me try." The Queen Mother's eyes lit up, She sat up and clapped her hands. Prepare pen, ink, paper, and inkstone. Promise. The palace maid finally breathed a sigh of relief after hearing the sound. She ran to the side room and took the Zuxi rice paper and Mobei Longhao that she had already secured, and put the bookcase down in front of Su Buling. The Queen Mother no longer showed the indifference she had just shown. She stood up with a smile, stood next to the desk, gently held her sleeves and added some water to the inkstone to grind the ink. Her movements were gentle and graceful, which was pleasing to the eye. Su Buling sat in front of the writing desk, feeling a bit like Li Tebei asked the imperial concubine to study ink. The Queen Mother is gorgeous but dignified, and her grandeur from the inside out adds a different charm. She is probably more attractive than Yang Yahuan. After all, Yang Yahuan is just a noble concubine. This is a serious Queen Mother. The Emperor, he mother. Rustle. The ink sticks gently in the inkstone, and the Queen Mother looked down on her with a friendly smile. I have read a lot of poems and books, but don't copy a random one to fool people. You must write it specifically for me. Su Buling nodded, picked up the Longhao, and wondered which song to copy. There are quite a lot of deep palace poems in the history. Even if you can't think of one, you can get by with the familiar Speechless Alone on the West Tower. It's a pity that the Queen Mother finally invited Su Buling here, but she was angry again. She would not let Su Buling do it perfunctorily, and even added some requirements. Staying in the deep palace is already miserable. I don't want to hear, things are different and people are different. Let me shed tears first if you want to speak. I need to have a better meaning and write it down so that I can be happy. Su Buletinling raised his eyes to look at the Queen Mother, hesitated for a moment, and nodded. It's easy to make people happy. It's nothing more than flattering and complimenting a woman. For a woman, from 8 to 80 years old, if you compliment her on her beauty, you may not admit it openly, but you will definitely not be angry in your heart. Su Buletinling gently held up his sleeves and looked like he was thinking hard. When the Queen Mother saw Su Buling agreeing, she seemed to have guessed what Su Buling was thinking. She pursed her lips and said again, etc. Su Buletinling's scalp was numb and he raised his head helplessly. Well, what else does the Queen Mother have to ask for? Just say it. I may not be able to write it down anyway. The Queen Mother smiled crookedly and raised her hand to Chiao Yi. Bring that painting over here. Chiao Yi seemed to know that the Queen Mother would mention this, so she hurried to the Queen Mother's bedroom. Please give me some recommendations. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guangzi. Chapter 95. After asking Chiao Yi to get the scroll, the Queen Mother tidied her clothes a little, sat down on the soft couch next to her, picked up the bronze mirror and looked at it, with a somewhat sad look on her eyebrows. After 10 years in the Deep Palace, I have already passed the prime of my life. I cannot compare to what I was back then. Su Buletinling shook his head with a smile. The Queen Mother must not be humble. In Buletinling's view, the Queen Mother is in her youth, how can she be said to be older? Furthermore, a beautiful woman is like a fine wine. A fine wine that has been accumulated over the years is naturally better than just one. The new wine tastes good. This is what the Queen Mother once said. After hearing this, the Queen Mother blinked her eyes, covered her lips with her sleeves and laughed. I didn't notice. Xiao Buling's mouth is quite sweet. No wonder Hongluan keeps staring at you all day long. Su Buletinling was awe-inspiring. I'm just telling the truth. I don't mean to flatter you. The Queen Mother was in a much better mood. She put down her bronze mirror, assumed a rather dignified but elegant posture, and thought about it for a moment. Time is not forgiving, and it cannot compare to the past. Have you heard of Su Danking? Su Buling nodded. The contemporary painting sage painted 8 beauties during the Suan He period, and my mother was one of them. The portrait is still hanging in my father's study. A bit of pride flashed through the Queen Mother's eyes, and she nodded slightly. When Su Danking was a guest at the Xiao family in Huainan, he also painted a picture for me. At that time, there was a lot of rumors about this matter in the world, and they came up with the term Suan Hibikui, and I was included in it. I heard something. What a pity people have changed now. Su Danking has painted 8 people, and without exception, they all had rough life experiences. Queen Kui Zioan died in depression, Miss Tang Jia escaped from marriage and became a monk. Your mother, alas, I am still pretty good, I'm lucky, but I can't escape the fate of dying alone in the palace. I don't know if Su Danking's writing is poisonous. The Queen Mother should not worry about these things. Su Buletinling couldn't be comforted. After all, a Queen Mother would definitely be inseparable from the palace in this life. There was no other way but to relax and live happily. A moment later, Chiao Yi trotted over, holding the painting box carefully in her hands. The Queen Mother obviously attached great importance to this painting. After getting up and taking it, she held the scroll and unfolded it in front of Su Buling, and a picture of a beautiful woman appeared on the paper. The woman on the scroll is very similar to the Queen Mother. She is wearing a skirt and holding a fan. There are 2 green bamboos and a magpie around her. The writing is simple and casual, but in one stroke, the beauty of the cardamom age is vividly displayed. You can feel the slightly playful liveliness of the beauty through the painting. The Queen Mother was very interested and patiently explained, the 2 bamboos in the painting are Xiangfei bamboos, and my nickname is Xiao Xiang. In ancient times, Emperor Shun succeeded Yao, and Emperor Yi and Anving were his concubines. Empress Shun the emperor went on a tour to the south and died in Kangguo. The second concubine went to look for him and learned that Emperor Shun was dead and buried at the foot of Juyi Mountain. Bamboo. Su Buling had heard of this before and nodded, then this magpie. Chiao Yi stood beside her to help hold up the scroll and said with a smile, the Queen Mother was lively when she was young. When she heard that Su Danking was passing by, she sent someone to invite Su Danking back, and she chatted and persuaded her for several days. The Queen Mother's cheeks were slightly red, with a hint of dissatisfaction. Chiao Yi quickly shut up, lowered her head and stopped talking. Su Buling sat in front of the writing desk with a brush, suddenly feeling the same. Su Danking was a jock, how could he offend the Huainan Xiao family? He was probably in a similar situation to him back then. The words please and persuade were too elegant, and tied and threatened were probably more realistic. Su Buling could imagine the way the Queen Mother stared and said, if you don't paint today, you will live in the Xiao family for the rest of your life and don't have to leave. However, the Empress Dowager is well deserved to be the Suan Hibikui based on her appearance alone. Those who can enter the palace and become the mother of the country are all naturally beautiful beauties. There may be other reasons why Su Danking was tied up to do the painting. The Queen Mother introduced the picture very warmly for a while, then she put the picture of beauty beside her and said with a smile. Xiao Buletinling, do you think the person in the scroll looks better, or do I look better now? Kindergarten level exam. Su Buling said without thinking, although the beauties on the scroll have the beauty of a beautiful country, they are a little green and immature. Compared with the current Queen Mother, they are just like the Duan Yuebao in Sun's shop and the Duan Yuebao that the Empress Dowager has kept secretly for 10 years, the same wine, the latter is superior in both taste and flavor. Kakik. The Queen Mother's eyebrows were curved, and she smiled sweetly, you are not a big boy, but you are very nice to talk to. Su Buling shook his head, if this junior makes false claims, he will really stew himself. The Queen Mother smiled for a moment, put away the scroll, straightened her palace skirt and stood in front of the desk, folding her hands on her waist, standing tall and graceful, showing off her graceful figure to the fullest. Seeing that you are so good at talking, I won't care about your lies. Just write a poem in my image. I won't spread it to anyone else, especially Hongluan. Su Buling stared at the Queen Mother openly for a long time, looking from her head to her feet, and then from her feet to her head. The Queen Mother did not shy away from saying that Su Buletinling was her junior, and even held up the hem of her skirt and spun around in a circle, a common gesture in court dancing, with the hem of her skirt flying around, moving and then stopping, showing off the overwhelming beauty of the country. Su Buling brushed his sleeves and held his pen. He originally wanted to bring out Li Bai's Clouds Think of Clothes and Flowers Think of Wrong for cross-examination. After all, this poem was the most suitable. But after hesitating for a moment while holding the brush, Su Buring thought of the dragon locking goo on him again. Looking at the Queen Mother in front of her, she was silent for a moment, then raised her pen and wrote on the white rice paper. When autumn comes on September 8th, I will kill all the flowers after they bloom. The incense formation soaring to the sky penetrates Chang'an, and the whole city is covered with golden armor. After finishing writing, Su Buling placed the wolf hair on the pen mountain and nodded slightly. The Queen Mother did not expect to finish writing so quickly. She walked up to Su Buling with some expectation. She glanced at the rice paper and picked it up to look at it carefully with a hint of surprise. The Queen Mother obviously liked it very much. However, although she did not know that this poem was written when the rebels broke into Chang'an, the murderous intent in it could be seen. If this was misinterpreted, it would inevitably cause trouble. The Queen Mother pondered for a while, then smiled and said, "No, I don't have the ability to be proud of others. This poem is too murderous." Su Buling shook his head and smiled, "I have been poisoned, and I have never found a way to detoxify it. There is indeed some anger in my heart. Don't blame the Queen Mother." The Queen Mother folded the rice paper, put it in her arms, and said with a smile, "The Imperial Court has been investigating the matter of the locking dragon goo, and there will be clues sooner or later. You are still young, so you have to calm down. As long as you don't get angry and drink strong alcohol regularly, the dragon locking goo will not attack easily." Su Buling nodded and smiled softly, and asked the palace maid to put away the pen and ink on the desk. After casually chatting with the Queen Mother about household matters, she casually asked, "By the way, I have been fond of martial arts since I was a child. I have heard about Eunuch Jia for a long time. A few days ago, I heard from Aunt Lu that Eunuch Jia has an adopted son named Jia Yi. I have never seen him since he came to the capital. Does the Queen Mother know who he is?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 96. The Queen Mother sat sideways on the carved soft couch, took the tea from the palace maid, and placed it in front of Su Buring. Hearing the question, he frowned and thought for a moment. Jia Yi, Eunuch Jia has an adopted son. The emperor entered the palace 10 years ago when he ascended the throne. He first worked as an errand in the inner treasury, and was later adopted as an adopted son by Eunuch Jia. I don't care about this matter and don't know much about it. Su Buling picked up the teacup and nodded lightly. As long as he was still in the palace, it would be fine. However, eunuchs were also divided into different grades. The inner treasury was the private treasury of the emperor. Its importance was self-evident. A person who had just entered the palace had not been taken in by Eunuch Jia. As the adopted son of the eunuch, he became the official in charge, and his official career was quite good. Queen Mother, what was Jia Yi's identity before he entered the palace? The Queen Mother took a sip of tea and thought about it. She accidentally sucked the tea leaves into her mouth. She was so busy that she held half a green tea leaf with her thin red lips and looked around. Su Buling took out the handkerchief from his arms, spread it out in his palm and stretched it out. The Queen Mother blinked and felt a little embarrassed when sipping the tea leaves. She took the handkerchief, twisted the tea leaves around her lips, put it in, and handed it to the palace maid who came over. It seems that the Kui family asked him to go directly to the inner treasury to serve. He is still responsible for guarding the Lijiang Palace. He is probably a person sent by the Kui family to protect the queen. He can be adopted by eunuch Jia as his adopted son. He must be good at martial arts. Su Buling frowned slightly. The Kui family mentioned by the Queen Mother was the Kui family of Yuzhu in Xiaolu Kui Wangli, so it was the Queen's natal family. However, the Kui family has always been conservative and moderate, and can be regarded as a neutral faction in the court. They have no interest in entanglements with the Su family, and are unlikely to be involved in this matter. If you want to find out the dragon Lokgu, you may have to go to the palace in person. Jia Yin. Thinking of this, Su Buling stopped asking any more questions and took out a small gift box from the side. After opening it, there were several boxes of fragrant powder. Last time, I accepted the good wine from the Queen Mother, but I broke my promise to the Queen Mother. I really feel guilty. Before I came here today, I went to Xianzizai to select a few small items. The Queen Mother would like to see if there is anything I like. The Queen Mother was obviously surprised. She put down the teacup, leaned over to take the box, picked it up and looked at it for a few times. I don't want to do it, but I have my heart. Alas, Xiao Ting is so unsatisfactory. I watched him grow up and never saw him give anything away. He only thought about getting it from me. I heard on weekdays that Xianzizai has a new product. Things, I have to let Jiao Yi do the errands. Su Buling smiled and answered the question, if the Queen Mother likes it, I will go over in a few days to pick out some rouge and gouache and send it to the Queen Mother. I wonder what the Queen Mother likes. The Queen Mother was very happy when she saw that Su Buling wanted to go to the palace to accompany her. He closed the box and placed it on his lap naturally. He raised his finger and pointed at his red lips. This is fine. Su Buletinling's expression froze. He didn't know what color the lipstick was. Wouldn't it cost him his life? If I had known, I would have brought Lao Xiao with me. Jiao Yi noticed Su Buling's hesitation in speaking, and said softly. The Queen Mother likes red orchid nectar. If it's hard for the Crown Prince to choose, just pick the most expensive one. This is how my maid used to choose. Cough dash. The Queen Mother narrowed her eyes slightly, obviously feeling that these words were very tasteless. If a woman picks out rouge and buys expensive ones, she will not become a rich man. Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief and put down the teacup. I understand, I will definitely bring it with me when I visit another day. The Queen Mother was originally preparing to launch an attack today, but now she was made happy. The depression and dissatisfaction of the past few days disappeared, and there was a sense of brightness in her brows, but her hospitality was obviously not enough. At this time, I felt a little embarrassed. I didn't prepare anything today, and I accepted something from you. This elder in my palace is really incompetent. After saying that, he picked up the painting box and handed it to Su Buling. I didn't prepare any gifts, so this painting is I'll give it to you. There are not many authentic works of Su Danking in the world. Su Buletinling was a little flattered. The calligraphy works of the painting sage Su Danking have been fetched sky-high prices in the market after he sealed his pen. Most people have never even seen fakes, let alone buying them. It is estimated that no one would dare to copy this beautiful painting of the Queen Mother. The Emperor had to bow when he saw it, and the Queen Mother obviously liked this painting very much, so he would not dare to accept it. This is too precious. The Queen Mother should keep it for herself. The Queen Mother chuckled lightly and put the painting box into Su Buling's hand. You have said that I look better now than before. What else do I still do? Just call Su Danking and paint another one another day. Besides, your poem is equally precious. Hundreds and thousands of years from now, which one will be better? I really can't tell. I won't take advantage of you. Su Buling didn't want to accept it, so he was secretly thinking about something to say. When the Queen Mother saw that he didn't answer, her brows showed a bit of sadness, and she shook her head. Don't like it? It doesn't matter, it seems that I am too passionate. Su Buring wanted to check on Jia Yi. He would inevitably come to the palace in the future, so as not to upset the Queen Mother. He smiled and took the painting box with both hands. Junior naturally likes it, thank you Queen Mother. Under the same sky. Pedestrians crowded on the streets of Chang'an, and wealthy families buying New Year goods drove horse-drawn carriages through the streets and markets. There were also fewer Jianghu people passing by. After all, Jianghu people also have a destination, and there are only a few who spend their whole lives wandering around in the Jianghu. Zhu Manzi came out of the yamen, held the knife in his hand and walked listlessly to the street. The clothes he wore were changed into brand new Wolf Guard uniforms. The previous ones were torn by Ning Qingyi and could no longer be worn. If he wasn't damaged on duty, the yamen would naturally not recognize him. He had to buy new clothes with his own money, and the chief had to talk about his lavish spending. Zhu Manzi must be feeling distressed as he lives alone and earns the few possessions he has. And when she went to dig a grave yesterday, Prince Su said he would take her to Ziliang. She lay awake and thought about it last night. There was no such thing as a free banquet in the rivers and lakes. To travel all the way to Suzhou to be a retainer, she had to have some capital, right? I had to rely on Prince Su for food and clothing. This is just like a girl getting married. Bringing a rich dowry is better than just bringing a body, and she will be respected by others and her status will be relatively higher. Zhu Manzi didn't have much money saved, so he had to earn the money he deserved. She can only get reward money for a wolf guard, but the wolf guards in Tianzi camp are replenished too slowly, and they will definitely not be able to find teammates in a short time. And she can't solve a big case without fighting. Thinking about it, Zhu Manzi walked around the street several times, and for some reason he came to an alley with an abandoned house in front of him. Why are you here? Zhu Manzi was about to turn around and leave, but suddenly another thought came to his mind. She can't fight, but someone can. Zhu Manzi thought about it for a while and suddenly felt that this was a good idea. Ning Qingyi belongs to Prince Su, so everyone is in the same group, and they will not compete with her for credit. This free labor is not in vain. Thinking of this, Zhu Manzi suddenly became happy. He ran to the door of the yard with his waist knife, raised his hand and knocked twice. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 97. Hu. Fen He Sword God. Tisk dash. Hearing the response from inside, Zhu Manzi put her hands on her waist and wanted to curse a few words, but when she thought that she couldn't win, she quietly snorted to express her dissatisfaction. Squeak. The old courtyard door opened, and Ning Qingyi, wrapped in fox fur, walked out, looking down at Zhu Manzi's chest with cold eyes. Zhu Manzi panicked and quickly raised her hands to hug her chest, her big eyes full of caution. Don't do it, a piece of clothing costs 3 taels of silver, the government is very corrupt, you have to pay if you damage it. Ning Qingyi was of course not interested in doing it, and said calmly. What's the matter? Zhu Manzi nodded after confirming that the other party would not do it, and said very seriously. Mr. Su saw that you had nothing to do in the house, so he asked you to follow me to catch thieves and accumulate experience in the martial arts world. Ning Qingyi frowned, the thief cried thief. It seems that you have studied in the Taoist temple. Zhu Manzi held back her laughter for a long time before she nodded seriously, we're not going to catch you, we're going to catch other thieves? Then wouldn't I be a lackey of the court? A lackey, no, a retainer of Master Su. Ning Qingyi pondered for a moment, but didn't refuse. After all, she had a lot of experience in the martial arts world, but she rarely dealt with the government. In the future, she would inevitably come into contact with the wolf guards to seek revenge, so it wouldn't be a problem to follow and take a look. Ning Qingyi took out a long sword from the house, hung up the fox fur in the house, changed into a cape and hat, and went out with Zhu Manzi. "Who are you going to catch?" Zhu Manzi was happy, but her expression did not change. She took out the impermanence book and pointed at the few lines of handwriting on it. "There is a Zheng Sandao in the West Market. He is the local snake in the West Market. It is said that 2 gambling houses belong to him. The entire Daiziyan can't catch him. Very powerful." Yes, Mr. Su couldn't catch him. He is very difficult to deal with." Ning Qingyi paused. "Mr. Su is powerful and can't do anything about it. I'm going to die." Zhu Manzi laughed. "In my opinion, the girl is more powerful than Mr. Su. She is decisive in killing and has high martial arts skills. She hasn't been poisoned." Ning Qingyi raised his eyebrows slightly, but did not deny it. He nodded and was abducted. In the afternoon, Su Buling left the imperial city and went directly to the imperial college to continue his retreat. The main purpose of going to the palace today is to get closer to the Queen Mother. If we really want to investigate Jia Yi, we have to wait a few days, otherwise entering the palace too frequently will attract the attention of those who are interested. Judging from the situation during the banquet today, the Queen Mother has stabilized. She was in a very good attitude during the meal, just like Aunt Lu, who was in a good mood. Su Buling wanted to take the opportunity to make a suggestion, sending the upright Gongsun father and son to Lingnan to farm or Shangzi to mine coal. The Queen Mother is Xiao Xiang's sister, so it's just a matter of a word. But after thinking carefully, there is no excuse. After all, Su Buling saw Gongsun lose innocent heart and didn't know about it. If he helped him speak and then sent him into exile, who would dare to help him in the future? Gongsun Lu commanded a part of the imperial guards to be responsible for the city defense. Keeping this incense and love may not be useless in the future. After thinking about it, Su Buling let Gongsun father and son go for the time being. The carriage swayed and stopped outside the imperial college. Su Buling walked towards the bell and drum tower with the painting box in his arms, and happened to run into young Master Xiao coming out of Wenku Garden after school. Xiao Ting was discussing with several princes and nobles about going there to discuss poetry in the evening. When he saw Su Buling, he ran over and looked him up and down. "Oh! Su Buling, you actually came outstanding, you have some ability, didn't your aunt stew you?" Su Buling was too lazy to pay attention to this idiot, and walked over without saying a word. Xiao Ting was quite interested. He followed him in the middle of winter, fanning himself. He looked at the painting box in Su Buling's hand. "You still buy paintings? Tisk tisk tisk, you've become famous for a few poems. You really act like a scholar." Su Buling put the painting box on the other side and hugged it. "Get lost." Xiao Ting smiled and became a little more serious. He began to pretend to be refined. "I have studied a lot of Danking calligraphy and painting. Do you know the painting Saint Su Danking? The original is with my aunt, and there is also a pair with the emperor. I have studied them all. Do you want your uncle to help you with your opinion?" Su Buling raised his eyebrows. "I heard that the one with the Empress Dowager is a painting of the Empress Dowager." Xiao Ting clapped his hands with a folding fan, his eyes full of pride. "Of course, my aunt was the runner-up of the 8 champions of Suanhe, and her ranking was even higher than that of Princess Su. Alas, it's a pity that beauties have always had many ups and downs." Su Buling's eyes turned cold. Xiao Ting sensed the murderous intent and shut up in time and laughed. "Don't be so angry. Well, do you know who is the most beautiful one among the 8 Suanhe candidates?" Su Buling frowned. "Those who can be called the national beauties must have their own merits. The difference between the superior and the inferior depends on personal preference. Where does the superiority and inferiority come from? Not really." Xiao Ting shook his head. Su Danking is called the painting saint by the people in the world. He only paints beauties in his life. He will not paint unless they are stunningly beautiful. The reason why he only painted 8 is because after painting the last one, he felt that it was difficult for women in the world to be painted, so he stopped painting and retired. Su Buling frowned slightly. It is difficult for women in the world to be painted. What a big tone. Do you really think there is no more beauty in the world? I think Nangqingyi of Changqing Temple is as good as any woman in the world. Yo. Xiaoting was stunned, and said with a smile, you also like Fairy Ning? We are the same. There are many picture albums in the world, which evaluate the beauties in the world during the Zhaohong period. Fairy Ning has always topped the list. I have admired her for a long time. Alas, it's a pity that Fairy Ning has a dull personality and has been staying in the mountains as a Taoist nun for many years. I have no chance to see her. Xiaoting sighed for a long time. Seeing that Su Buling didn't respond, he remembered something and whispered to him. By the way, speaking of beauties, an exotic beauty came to the Siyi Pavilion yesterday. I heard that she looks very different. Her eyes are green, and her skin is as white as paper. Su Buling raised his eyebrows. Green eyes, white as paper, female demon. Who knows, it may be a bunch of country bumpkins who have never seen the world and spread it nonsense. Xiaoting muttered a few words and prepared to turn around and leave. Su Buling remembered something, paused, and turned around. Xiaoting, who do you think is better, the portrait of the Empress Dowager or the Empress Dowager herself? Xiaoting spread his hands. Is there any need to ask? They are both good looking. Did my aunt ask you too? Su Buling's face froze slightly, and he suddenly felt that there was something wrong with his answer at noon. No wonder the Empress Dowager suddenly didn't want this painting. Thank you for your advice. Hey, there is no end to learning. Ask me more questions like this in the future. I, as an elder, will answer any questions. After saying goodbye to Xiaoting, Su Buling returned to the room under the Imperial College. Looking at the painting box in his hand, he suddenly had a headache. Others gave him good things, and Aunt Lu had to give him something better. The last time the Empress Dowager gave him wine was an example. These days, he heard from Lao Xiao that Aunt Lu went to the Sun family shop, probably to find good wine. Very few of Su Danking's calligraphy works have been preserved, and most of them are in the hands of princes and generals. Aunt Lu can't find a better one. If she knew that he had a secret meeting with the Queen Mother in the palace and accepted this painting of a beauty, she would definitely feel aggrieved for many days. Burning the painting is too wasteful, but he couldn't bear to do it. Su Buling hesitated for a moment, then squatted down and stuffed the painting box under the bed and hid it. Recommend a historical fiction, and send it to prepare for pregnancy Song Biun. This book drives like flowing clouds and water without leaving any traces. Author's words, old perverts come quickly, I found lily control. The current internal fan is not good, I write it myself. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 98. The rumors of a big play in Changqing Palace gradually cooled down as the new year approached. More and more people flocked to the streets, and the visits to relatives and friends became more frequent. At noon, Song Yufu dressed up carefully, holding 2 pieces of cloth carefully selected from Jiangnan cloth shop, and walked through the 3 octagonal archways on Kuishao Street. Since she stuffed the spoon into Su Buling's mouth last time, Song Yufu hid at home for several days, fearing that Su Buling would come over and stuff something hot and scalding into her mouth. Fortunately, Su Buling had a bit of tolerance and didn't argue with her. After hiding for a few days and not being beaten, Song Yufu naturally relaxed in her heart, and thought of the hairpin she had been thinking about. Alas! Last time, I accidentally offended Su Buling. Not only will I be troubled if I go to ask for the hairpin, but I will definitely not be able to get it back. Song Yufu pondered for a long time at home, and then she thought about looking for her parents. In Chengqing Palace, Madame Lu said that she could discipline Su Buling, and if there was any trouble, she could come to her. As long as Madame Lu was willing to ask, the hairpin might be returned. So, Song Yufu went to the cloth shop to pick out 2 pieces of good cloth, and sneaked out of the Xiao mansion. The Xiao family in Kuishao Street is not only the residence of Prime Minister Xiao, but also has Xiao's family, and there are also many Xiao's children from the side branches, and many of them are studying in the Imperial Academy. Song Yufu informed the housekeeper of her purpose, and after reporting the name of my father Song Baking, she was led by the housekeeper to the Jinghua Yuan villa in the back. Heavy snow fell in winter. On the lakeside pavilion of Jinhua Garden, Madame Lu and Yunu were sitting on the terrace embroidering, with a heater under their feet and a few maids beside them, chattering. The young prince went to Changle Palace and stayed there from Chenchi to Shenchi 3/4. He must have had a meal in the palace. I heard from the palace maids that the queen mother was in a very good mood these days and gave all the maids bonuses. The young prince has been staying in the Imperial College these days. He is either practicing swords or staring at the palace in a daze. I don't know what he is thinking about. Madame Lu was wrapped in a goose yellow shawl, holding a brand new young man's robe in her hand. She only listened but didn't say anything. She took a deep breath from time to time, and her mature and beautiful face showed a bit of boredom. Yunu was holding needle and thread. When she heard someone coming, she looked up and said softly, "Madam, Miss Song is here." Madame Lu frowned slightly, turned around with a little surprise, then stood up, asked the maid to prepare tea and chairs, walked down the waterside pavilion, and nodded from a distance. "Yufu, how come you have time to come and visit your aunt today?" Madame Lu's tone was friendly, but there was some doubt in her eyes. After all, Song Yufu came here with 2 pieces of cloth. If she said she was here to propose marriage, how should she respond? If she drove her away, wouldn't she be angry? Song Yufu smiled implicitly, walked up to her and bowed. "Lu madam, I just came here to take a look. If it's inconvenient for you." "What are you talking about? It's snowing outside. Come in." Madame Lu was confused, but she couldn't be rude on the surface. She smiled and led Song Yufu into the lakeside pavilion, sat down next to the stove, and personally poured a cup of hot tea for her. "Yufu, you came to see me. Did you cause trouble in the Imperial College?" "No." Song Yufu was still a little nervous. Although her father was very powerful, the person in front of her was the legitimate daughter of the Jinling Lu family. Among the 3 dukes and 9 ministers of the dynasty, the prime minister was her father-in-law, and the minister of agriculture was her biological father. Ordinary concubines had to address her as madam. Song Yufu put down the 2 pieces of cloth and took the teacup politely. I have something private to do, and I want to ask madam for a favor." Mrs. Lu put her hands on her thighs, sat in a dignified and elegant posture, and smiled. "Don't be polite, just say it directly." Song Yufu brooded for a long time before she dared to speak. "I eavesdropped on Prince Su's poetry a few days ago, and then the Longian poetry meeting caused trouble for the prince. At that time, I promised not to reveal the poems, and the prince took my hairpin away." Mrs. Lu's expression froze, and her face suddenly became strange. The hairpins of girls and the jade pendants of boys have always been inseparable objects, and are generally used as tokens of love. I didn't expect that you too. Song Yufu knew that she would be misunderstood, so she quickly explained, "The prince took it away by force, and I had no choice. Later, Chengqing Palace, the prince didn't return it to me. I didn't break my promise, I didn't want to say it at the time." For this, Mrs. Lu was sitting next to her at the time, and she was more clear. Madame Lu nodded, finally understanding why Song Yufu always hung around Su Buling, and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. "It's just a small matter. Buling has a bad temper. When he's angry, he only listens to me. I'll tell him in a few days. Song Yufo said with some gratitude, "Thank you, madam. I will definitely stay away from the prince in the future." Madame Lu couldn't help but feel a little strange when she heard this. "I always felt like a bad elder who broke up a couple and tried every means to prevent the younger generation from getting in touch. If Su Buling knew, he would probably be unhappy." Thinking of this, Madame Lu pondered for a moment. "We are in the same imperial college, and there is no need to be strangers. Well, you can rest assured to get in touch with Buling. If you have any trouble, come to me at any time, however, don't get too close. Buling's identity is special. If someone with ulterior motives misunderstands him, it will inevitably lead to rumors." Song Yufo blinked her eyes, pondered for a long time, but didn't understand what this meant, so she nodded. "I will pay attention. There is a sentence in the school notes, the way of learning, strict teachers are difficult, strict teachers can respect the way, and respect the way can make people know how to respect learning. I am taking my father to take care of the students, and I should also fulfill my duties as a teacher. Recently, some of Su Shi's behavior is not appropriate, and madam should also take care of it." Mrs. Lu frowned slightly. "What's wrong with not letting me?" Song Yufo blushed, and naturally did not dare to tell others about touching her buttocks, but whispered, "It's nothing, just a bit fierce, ungentlemanly." The tone was a little aggrieved and depressed. Mrs. Lu suddenly realized and consoled with a smile, the Su family is a military family, and Su Buling has been at the border for several years, so it is inevitable that he has a bad temper. Men who lead troops to fight should have a temper, which is different from the weak scholars in Chang'an. Miss Song will get used to it. How to get used to being spanked? Song Yufo pursed her lips and talked for a while. She felt that Mrs. Lu was pampering Su Buling in her words and deeds. It is estimated that if Su Buling did not give her the hairpin, Mrs. Lu would not really discipline Su Buling. She still had to find a way out herself. Thinking of this, Song Yufo did not say much. After chatting about some small things, she stood up and said goodbye. Mrs. Lu sent Song Yufo out of Jinghua Garden. Looking at Song Yufo's figure, she whispered, "She is not old, but she has a good body for childbearing." As she said this, Mrs. Lu tightened her skirt, turned her head to look, and then looked down, and then walked back gracefully. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 99. 7 days have passed in the blink of an eye since the last time I entered the palace. After Su Buletinling felt that the cooling off period was almost over, he sent a message to the palace and visited the Queen Mother again in the afternoon. At this time, there were only a few days left before the New Year's Eve. During the few days he stayed in the Imperial College, Su Buling asked Lao Xiao and the guards to investigate the situation. The Lichhan Palace was the residence of the Queen, and it might be difficult to talk to Jia Yi in the Emperor's harem. However, no matter how difficult it was, Su Buling still had to find a way. The dragon-locking goo on his body was like the sword of Damos hanging above his head. If he didn't unlock it, he would be controlled forever. The harem is separated from Changal Palace by a 1,000-step corridor. Naturally, this method can only be started from the Queen Mother. Arrangements for entering the palace were in full swing, but the news coming back from the outside made Su Buletinling a little bit dumbfounded. According to the report from Lao Qi and Lao Ba, Zhu Manzi didn't know why he went crazy. He dragged Ning Qingyi out and went on a rampage, demolishing gambling houses, smashing brothels, arresting prostitutes, and arresting gamblers. Whoever was easy to bully was eliminated in just a few days. The gangsters in Chang'an City made everyone feel at risk, and most of the backlog of thankless cases in the Criminal Investigation Department were solved, which increased the Wolf Guard's crime detection rate in one fell swoop. Zhu Manzi took the silver reward softly, and Ning Qingyi didn't mind the price reduction. He used the banner of Wolf Guard to clean up the little gangsters everywhere. It looked like he was having a lot of fun. It was probably because he had been recovering from his injuries for a long time. Su Buling naturally didn't interfere in this. Everyone has his own life, as long as he doesn't get into trouble. At noon, Yushu Linfen, who was dressed up again without permission, first arrived outside Jinghua Garden on Kuishao Street. I promised to give the Queen Mother Rouge last time, and I must bring it with me when entering the palace today. Moreover, it's not enough to just do business and forget Aunt Lu. A good man is good at both family and work, so he just took advantage of the opportunity to go out with Aunt Lu to relax. The warm sun was hanging in the sky, and Su Buling stood quietly waiting outside the courtyard. Within a moment, Mrs. Lu, who had been prepared for a long time, walked out wearing a dark green winter skirt, a waistcoat on her shoulders, and her hair combed into a casual style that has become more popular recently. The bun has a flower hairpin inserted between the bun, and the dignified temperament has not disappeared, but it has become a bit brighter out of thin air. Su Buletinling smiled, walked to the carriage and raised his hand to help. Aunt Lu. Mrs. Lu was in a good mood. After getting on the carriage, she turned around and stretched out her hand. Su Buletinling naturally held the white catkins and got on the carriage effortlessly. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The wheels rolled over the stone road and headed to the most prosperous Zhuangyuan street in the capital. Mrs. Lu leaned against the car window, helping Su Buling tidy up her clothes and hair, and said softly, "Why do you want to go out with me for a walk today? Are you not restrained?" Su Buling wanted to enter the palace, and it was impossible to hide it. Faced with Mrs. Lu's question, she said with a smile, "The grounding is just a temporary statement from the Holy One. I haven't gone out for a walk with Aunt Lu for a long time. Last time I fell into the water and caught the wind and cold. I'm afraid that Aunt Lu will be depressed if she stays at home." Mrs. Lu arranged Su Buling's clothes, looked at them carefully, and then sighed glumly. "Didn't you say you won't enter the palace? You went to apologize last time, but you went again just a few days ago. Are you afraid that I will be angry?" Su Buling knew what he was going to say. With a smile on his face, he raised his hand to rub Mrs. Lu's shoulders. "The Queen Mother is an elder. She accepted 2 jars of wine but broke her promise. After all, I feel sorry for her. I just went to visit the elder. What's wrong with Aunt Lu? If you get angry, you should think I'm sensible." Mrs. Lu frowned slightly and twisted her shoulders, but did not break away from Su Buling's hand. "I am strict, but the Queen Mother is very generous. Look what she has done to Xiaoteng. I'm afraid you will do it too. The Queen Mother will never get close to my aunt. As the saying goes, those who are close to red are red and those who are close to ink are black. I am not angry, but I am afraid that you will learn bad things." Su Buling nodded and chuckled, "I'm not a white-eyed wolf. Aunt Lu is so kind to me, which makes my heart warm. Last time I rested in my room for a night, she even changed all the quilts, sheets, and pillows for me." Mrs. Lu's cheeks turned red, and she quickly pressed her back. Her resentful look disappeared instantly. She sat up straight and moved further in, and said softly, "It's just convenient, don't take it to heart." "All right." Su Buling curled his lips and finally became clear. After such an interruption, Mrs. Lu spoke out no matter how much she had held back. She sat upright in the carriage, glancing at Su Buling from time to time, wondering what she was thinking. Su Buletinling naturally sat upright with no strange expression at all. There was silence in the carriage for a moment. Mrs. Lu thought of Song Yufu and spoke calmly without any emotion. "By the way, Did you snatch Song Yufu's hairpin? A woman's hairpin is very important. Taking it away rashly will have bad consequences. Su Buling frowned. He didn't expect Song Yufu to be so courageous. He filed a lawsuit with Mrs. Lu, and the hairpin couldn't be returned to her. What a man has said is hard to follow. If he says he will give it back to her when he leaves Beijing, he will give it back to her when he leaves Beijing. When Mrs. Lu saw what he said, she stopped asking any more questions. You just have to be sensible, but don't forget, if there is a girl you like, bring her over first and show her to me as your aunt. That's natural. Su Buletinling nodded with a smile. The carriage swayed and soon arrived at Daifang. When passing a restaurant not far from Longjian Pavilion, there were suddenly several noises outside and the carriage stopped suddenly. Mrs. Lu was sitting inside, lost in thought, when she fell forward unexpectedly and hit Su Buling directly with the ah-dash sound. Su Buling reacted very quickly. When his center of gravity was unstable, he stretched out his hand and hugged Madame Lu, who was lying on the ground. He frowned and looked outside. Madame Lu lay diagonally in Su Buling's arms. She was a little confused and even forgot to ask. After looking up at Su Buling's expression, she calmly moved Su Buling's hand on her waist, sat up straight, hooked the hair by her ear, and asked with a little displeasure. "What's wrong?" The driver sitting outside the carriage said respectfully, "Madam, someone is fighting and blocking the road." Outside the window, dozens of people gathered in a grand manner. They were all ordinary people who came out to shop. They formed a large hollow circle outside the restaurant. Two men rolled up their sleeves in the middle of winter, their faces flushed, and they fought each other. One was dressed as a Jianghu man, and the other was dressed in exotic clothes. There were constant cheers from the surroundings. The martial arts spirit was prevalent in Daewoo. In the past, fighting in the streets damaged the dignity of a great country, so the court drove all martial arts halls to Hutai Street to prohibit private fighting. But this prohibition of private fighting refers to a life and death fight with iron weapons. Normally, if you don't fight with knives, as long as you follow the rules, the court will generally turn a blind eye, and the people also like to watch the excitement. However, the excitement in front of him obviously hindered the traffic order. Mrs. Lu was frightened, and Su Buling was naturally angry, so he got up and walked out immediately. Mrs. Lu hurriedly grabbed Su Buling's sleeve and advised, "Forget it, the people in the martial arts world are just playing, you are the Prince of Suwang, why are you angry with them?" Su Buling had to go to the palace later, but he was in no mood to watch the chickens fighting each other, so he smiled and responded, blocking the road, and left the car. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 100. Good. Sliding shovel. Go around and spare the one behind. Zhuangyuan Street was noisy. A group of common people shouted with red faces and ordered two men to fight. As for the two people in the duel, one was a master from the Hutai Street Martial Arts School, and the other was an envoy from a foreign country who had just entered Beijing. The people of Daewoo have always been arrogant and fond of martial arts. When they were eating in a restaurant, the martial arts master looked at the foreigner a few times and never thought that the foreigner did not behave with his tail between his legs. He also asked, "What are you looking at, and what happened next?" Just let nature take its course. However, what surprised the people around him was that this barbarian was really good at fighting against the martial arts master. He was losing ground and was about to lose his strength. A martial artist from Chang'an would be humiliated if he was beaten to the ground by a barbarian. Naturally, the people watching became anxious and angry, and even those with some skills wished they could go up on their own. On the second floor of the restaurant on the street, there is a private room facing the street. The envoy of Beixia Kingdom Hu Yanja and De Ma Jindao were sitting on the stool by the window, looking at the battle situation below. There were 4 people sitting in the private room. The woman in green eyes and red clothes had dull eyes and turned a blind eye to the scene outside. The two men in Miao attire next to them smiled playfully. Chang'an is known as a million warriors, but now it seems that it is nothing more than that. Just a few people from our Baiwulan can beat everyone here. I don't know how the imperial court lost back then for Su Lai. Nan Yu is the name of Dayu. It is naturally impossible for Baiwu, who was beaten as a lost dog, to change the country's name, just like Northern Qi still calls itself Dachi. Hu Yanjia sneered twice. Seeing that the outcome was almost decided, he had no intention of watching any more. He sat back at the table and said, "The military people of Dayu have always been above the top, thinking that all the Bai rivers and lakes are just xiao hiding in the ravines and ravines. Even the court of Dayu regards Baiu as a small country. This means that it has been stable for a long time and has not suffered any losses." The man next to him laughed twice. "If they hadn't looked down on others, how would we have had the opportunity to come and defraud the reward? Just get a few pieces of fox skin and wild ginseng, and what we get in exchange is real money." Hu Yanjia raised his hand and stopped the man's words. "You can't leave Chang'an until after the new year. Don't be so showy if you don't have the money." Then he looked at the green-eyed woman opposite. "Zhongli Chuchu, your idea is really brilliant. Hu Yanjia, after traveling around for more than 10 years, this is the first time I know that I can make money like this." Zhongli Chuchu, whose face was covered with red gauze, had a bit of sarcasm in his eyes. "Dayu has always been like this. Officials are used to being comfortable. They don't know how much they weigh when they shout Heaven Kingdom, Shangguan. Zuya Island is thousands of miles apart, and they don't know how much they weigh. I want to check it out, but the emperor pays for it anyway." Hu Yanjia chuckled. "If we were to come here once a year, why would we travel around the world, provide food and drinks, pack up the gold and silver and put them in the car before leaving, and send people to escort them out of the border? It feels like we are really officials. The officials are all hungry ghosts who feed the common people. There is nothing strange about it." "That's true." Hu Yanjia thought about it for a moment and looked at the city of Chang'an, which was 100 times more prosperous than the capital of South Vietnam. "Although the money was cheated, there are only about 30 of us, and we won't get much in one cent. How about taking a job in Chang'an and making a fortune? Walk." Zhongli Chuchu snorted. "My share cannot be spared, and the rest is up to you." While he was talking, a luxurious carriage stopped outside the restaurant, and the driver on top raised his hand to drive away the people blocking the road. Hu Yanjia stood up and stood at the window. He raised his eyes and looked around. He saw a young man in white clothes walking out of the carriage. He had peach blossom eyes and angular eyebrows. His behavior showed nobility but was elegant. A vermilion wine gourd around his waist added a touch of elegance. The meaning of dissoluteness. "Haha, this man looks like a girl, and it's the first time I've seen someone prettier than Miss Chuchu." Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were also attracted. After a quick glance, he sneered, "All the scholars in Dayu are like this. They are so girly and weak that they can't restrain a chicken." "Wow." Before Zhongli Chuchu finished speaking, he saw the very weak young man in white stepping on the edge of the carriage with his knees slightly bent. The 4 big horses pulling the carriage neighed at the same time, and the carriage shook visibly to the naked eye. Then the young man in white rose into the sky, jumped over the bustling crowd, and hit the open space outside the restaurant. He was extremely violent but smooth, without even the slightest movement to relieve his force. Zhongli Chuchu's words stopped abruptly and he tilted his head slightly, his green eyes full of astonishment. Countless exclamations also sounded on the streets. The two people who were fighting privately became angry. When they saw someone disrupting the situation, they fisted and kicked each other without explanation. It was a pity that before the two of them raised their hands, the young man in white pinched the back collars with one hand, brought his hands together and touched them, and their heads hit each other with a muffled sound of bang. In an instant, his limbs went limp and he fainted. The young man in white raised his hand and threw the two of them into the restaurant, turned around and left. The onlookers were so shocked that they quickly got out of the way wherever they dared to take the lead. This guy is so arrogant. The person who beat us left just as soon as he asked. The two men in the private room were furious and looked at the leader, Hu Yanjia. Although most of their group of more than 30 people are just unscrupulous people brought in to make up their numbers, the four sitting here are some well-known masters in the South Vietnamese arena, especially blue-eyed scorpion Zhongli Chuchu, who has a high reputation among the younger generation of South Vietnam. It would be great if Hu Yanjia could travel with him. When Hu Yanjia saw his brother being beaten, no matter it was due to the rules of the world or the face of an envoy, it was impossible for him to remain silent. He immediately patted the window edge of the restaurant. "Boy, you." The words were not finished. The young man in white on the street threw it casually without even turning his head. Swish. The sound of breaking wind was heard. A silver ingot cut through the sky with terrifying power and hit Hu Yanjia's face directly. Hu Yanjia's pupils shrank slightly and his face changed drastically. The curved knife behind his waist was unsheathed and blocked in front of him. There was a crisp sound of ding, and the curved knife was smashed into an arc. Hu Yanjia's eyes were full of horror. The whole person was shocked by the force and took 3 steps back before he stabilized, knocking the table behind him crooked. Hiss. 3 sounds of gasping for air came from the private room. Several people turned their heads to look. The young man in white took off the wine gourd on his waist, raised his head and took a sip, then jumped onto the carriage leisurely, disappeared in the carriage, and didn't even bother to turn his head from beginning to end. Whose son is this? Such a good kung fu. So humming cool. The people on the street were whispering and watching the carriage of the rich and powerful go away. In the private room, Hu Yanjia was holding the silver ingot that had been smashed and deformed, and cold sweat slid down his forehead. He was relieved when the carriage disappeared from his sight. Who is this? So unreasonable, I am an envoy from a foreign country. Zhongli Chuchu stood up, looked out of the window for a few times, and then snorted lightly. I can't afford to offend you.